few days ago I saw this video from Renaissance Periodization titled The Ideal Body Fat Percentage for Max Muscle Growth. And I knew that this was going to make for a good video, so I of course immediately clicked and started taking notes, because I just knew for a fact that there are going to be a lot of things that we should cover together in this one. The reason why is because Renaissance Periodization is, unlike a lot of people think, not a goldmine. In this video I might sound like somebody who doesn't like Renaissance Periodization, but I want to come clear about this. This is only because of one reason, and that is I don't like Renaissance Periodization. I think that currently RP and Mike are one of the biggest threats towards natural bodybuilding there are available. And the reason why is because their advice is shit, which we will cover today in this video, and also they're growing more and more popular every single day, but that alone doesn't really make them unique. It doesn't really make them a big threat, because there are a lot of channels pushing out shit information every single day that are also growing in popularity. That's nothing special. The problem is that for some reason, Mike has managed to get a good reputation, a really fucking good reputation, even among the naturals who actually do give good advice on the platform. If you ask any of the Noble Natties, who I for the most part view as trustworthy sources of information, they, for some reason, almost all of them really like this guy. I have no idea why, because I know for a fact that pretty much all of them has training principles that go completely against Mike's training principles. They just simply have no idea about what the fuck Mike is really preaching. I think that is the case because I have personally talked with one of the Noble Natties, I'm not going to say which one, and I asked, hey, you gave a really good review about this person in the past in one of your videos, and you said that his programming is really good, but have you ever actually looked at the content that he has on his channel? This is terrible, and I know for a fact, I know your principles, and I know what he said, and these two clash completely, and you say that his programming is immaculate, and he admitted it himself that he didn't know that much about the guy, and what he has seen so far has been good, but he might not have gone really deep into the trenches of it, which you don't really have to go really deep into it actually. Almost all of his videos has shit information that is not only bad, but goes completely against the advice of the people who I deem to actually give good advice, and they still for some reason think that Mike is a good source of information when their ideas are completely opposite, and they openly call out the kind of information that Mike gives, but not when Mike gives it, because they just have no idea about Mike giving it, because he makes all of his shit so complicated that nobody actually looks at that. So that is why Mike is so dangerous, because he has somehow convinced people to say good things about him who otherwise would have never said anything good about him. But eventually I'm going to make an entire series on a playlist he has on his YouTube channel about his training method, and we're going to break it down to pieces, and then I'm going to talk about this a little bit more as well. But now let's look at the video.
Hey folks, Dr. Mike here for RP Strength. For this, I have given you 4 ranges of body fat. I will term them ultra lean, pretty lean, kind of fluffy, and full, in honor of Kyriakos Grizzly, of course.
Here we can already see that Mike has no idea about what it's like being a natural. That is very typical. A lot of people have been enhanced for so long that they have completely forgotten what it was like being a natural, and now you could come with a critique that Mike doesn't only make content for naturals, he also makes content for enhanced people. The only problem is the majority of his viewers are gonna be natural, and he doesn't elaborate at all which advice works for naturals and which advice works for enhanced lifters. And you can see that a lot of the times when he gives advice, that advice seems to be a lot more relevant to enhanced lifters than to natural lifters. A lot of the times his advice doesn't even work at all for naturals, even though that's like 99% or even more of his audience. But Mike has no idea about that, because he has clearly completely forgotten what it was like being a natural. Okay, so my critique with this is, first of all, 5 to 10% is not ultra lean for a natural. It's impossible / deadly. 5 to 10% is the kind of body fat that as a natural you should never get into, especially towards the lower end of it, and you're not even really going to be ever able to achieve it without steroids. Pretty lean is, according to him, 10 to 15%, which I would argue that for naturals is not pretty lean. It's very lean. Okay, it's definitely not ultra lean, but 10 to 15% is really lean for a natural. And I would argue that even this range is not the most optimal for muscle growth. It starts getting there towards the end of the range, but for me personally, like 10, 11% you really start to get very anabolic towards like 13-14%, and then after that, when you're in like 15-16%, that's when the gains are usually gonna start becoming the best. But keep in mind that bulking at 10, 11, 12% is not that bad. The problem is getting there. The problem is cutting to that point when you're 10% body fat. Personally, for me, starting a bulk at 11% would be perfectly fine if I didn't have to go there in the first place. Because when I am in a surplus, I feel good at 11%. But when I'm trying to get there and I'm at completely the end of my cut and everything is going like shit, trying to get to 11% is just completely pointless. It's just sacrificing gains for nothing, essentially. But yeah, this range is not pretty lean, it's very lean, especially if you have muscles. And then we get the kind of fluffy range, which is 15 to 25% body fat. This is completely ridiculous. We're 1 minute into the 40-minute video and it's already bullshit, okay? A range that's between 15 and 25% body fat simply doesn't make any sense. And the kind of body compositions that you have in this range are so completely different that you cannot just call all of it kind of fluffy. Because first of all, half of it is not kind of fluffy, and then the other half of it is just overweight. 16% is still lean. It's not fluffy at all. 20% is what I would call kind of fluffy. And then when you get above that, you're just overweight. It's just unhealthy. And when you get to 25%, anything above that is just called obesity. So giving a range like that is already stupid as fuck. And I know for a fact that he's going to use that to create strawman arguments. So let's see what he comes up with. He starts with the ultra lean range, where he lists a bunch of downsides, which I completely agree with. And then he also says that this is pretty suboptimal for training, which I also agree with. He then says that despite all of this, you look really good, which is simply not true for naturals. At this body fat percentage, as a natural, you just look tiny.
You go to the club, models just unbutton your shirt instantly and start trying to see if they can scratch their hands on your abs. Oh my God, they're so sharp. Ha!
People won't start unbuttoning your shirt in the club like Mike says. Rather, they will give you a bowl of rice or they will pay you a meal because they think that you're dying from starvation. But I guess that's not that bad of a trade-off, since getting a random girl to go home with you from a bar is usually easier than getting a random girl at a bar to buy you free food. And also food, unlike meaningless sex, is actually going to contribute to your physique. So I guess after all, it's not that bad. But as a natural, you're not going to look good when you're this lean in real life. All of these fitness influencers on Instagram, you know what they do? They get a pump, they stand out in good lighting, oil up, shave, learn the perfect posing that makes them look bigger, take 10,000 motherfucking pictures, then choose one of them, and then they will post that, and that's what you see. And maybe they will even Photoshop it. When you see these same people in real life who have crazy physiques online, a lot of them look like they don't even lift. He also says that one upside of ultra lean is that from here you can bulk slowly for a really long time. The problem with that is when you're in this range, your body really just tries to put on fat. And it really doesn't matter how slow you're going to be bulking. Your body is gonna be like, hey, I need a little bit more subcutaneous fat to fucking function. And so you will get from 5% to 10% extremely easily, and then you can actually start slowly bulking and building muscle. And the problem with that is that if that's the case, why not just start at 10% in the first place? Because all of that runway that you had between 5 and 10%, it wasn't really a runway. You kind of just wasted it. Pretty much all of what you packed on was just fat, because that's what your body wanted, because your body is not gonna fucking build muscle when it's in starvation mode. Also, you can bulk for several years from 12% body fat, fuck, even from 15% body fat if you bulk correctly. You just need to bulk slowly. However, the reason why Mike is saying this is because he promotes bulking practices that are way too fast and that do not work for naturals. I've already made a video about this. When you're natural, time is your most valuable asset, because you can only gain so much of muscle at a given time. And it is exactly because of that that fast bulking doesn't work for naturals. It's not a good practice because it doesn't make any sense. You cannot gain more than X amount of muscle, so it doesn't matter if you pack on 2x or even 3x amount of weight in a given time. You're not going to build more muscle. It just simply doesn't work that way, but you can always make gains, and what is going to make your physique exceptional is gaining slowly for years and years on end. Whereas when you're a steroid user, that doesn't really work that way, because they tend to do cycles, because you're not going to blast a superficial,
what I meant to say here was super physiological,
amount of gear throughout all of your life, because then your life is not going to be super long. And so because of that, they only have a limited amount of time to gain muscle. So the timeline of the cycle, because after the cycle ends, you cannot pack on more muscle, because you're either going to just go in maintenance mode, or you're going to completely cycle off and try to recover your natural test levels before you do another cycle. And so they have to make the most they can of that little time making gains, but that's not the same for naturals. When you're a natural, you don't have to do that. What you have to do is just gain for a really fucking long time, and gaining a lot of body weight in a small amount of time doesn't work, because then you're just going to get fat, and that will prevent you from gaining for a long period of time at once. So again, this is a perfect example of somebody giving advice to an audience of mostly natural lifters who has completely forgotten what it was like being a natural.
If you start at 5%, my God, you can gain for fucking months uninterrupted, which is really good, before you become too fluffy to need to gain anymore.
Here he confirms this by saying that if you start at 5% body fat, you can gain for fucking months without getting fat. Fucking months? That's terrible.
Which is really good.
A bulk should at least be 1 year in length, at the very least. If you get too fat starting from 5% in a matter of months, you're just bulking way too fast. That is simply not fucking possible. That should never happen. You can literally start at 12% and bulk for several years before hitting 20%. I've been bulking for a year and around 2.5 months at this point, and I've started at around 12-13% body fat, and I would guess myself to be 16, maybe 17 right now. And he then confirms it by saying that if you start at 15%, you might go for a few weeks and then become too fat.
But if you start at 15%, you might gain for a few weeks and be like, fuck this, I need to die.
That should never happen. If you start at 15%, you can bulk for like 2 years before getting to 20%. But okay, I understand that not everybody wants to get to 20% because they feel like that's too fluffy. Okay, from 15%, you can still get to 18% in around a year at least. Like, you can start a bulk at 15%. You're perfectly able to start a bulk at 15%, and you can do it for at least a year. You get up to like 18%, and then you cut. Boom, done. In the end, he comes to the conclusion that if you do not experience any of the downsides in this range, then you're just simply going to be able to bulk for longer without any bad effects. So why not do it? And I agree with that. But how many people are going to be that? Nobody. Like, the chance that you can be fine below 10% body fat is like getting struck by lightning. You're probably not that guy. You can try it once if you want. I would think that even that for pretty much, almost everybody is a waste of fucking time. But if you want to try it so bad, try it once. It's going to feel like shit. You're welcome. And then you can get back to a reasonable bulking and cutting. Next, he goes into the pretty lean category. 10 to 15% is, in my opinion, a good range. This is a range that actually does make sense. Again, I wouldn't call it pretty lean. I would call it very lean, but at least the range makes sense. It's not too big, it's not too small, and 10 to 15% is a range that I can wrap my head around. That, you know, you don't look significantly different at one end of the range than at the other. There's no huge differences. But please, let's stop coming with the flexing Instagram post induced insecurity rhythm mindset. 10 to 15% is very lean. Okay, if you're a natural, 10 to 15% is really, really lean. If you have enough muscles, you can easily look pretty lean even after 15%. Like at 16, I would speculate myself to be like 16, maybe 17%. I'm really lean. Like, I look lean. And especially in a normie's eyes, which is most people have no fucking idea about lifting and about body fat percentages. You will look lean even at like 17%, and especially if you're like above your 30s, even if you're 20%, you're a fucking Adonis at that point. So please try to look at it realistically. 10 to 15% is very lean. Like, that's a really lean physique.
Some people really like to be lean. And for them, if they're even in that pretty lean phase, something's missing and they're just not pumped to go to the gym as much and to work as hard because they can't see the instant results. And that sucks.
This is where we come in and say that if you're the guy who loves the shreds and doesn't feel right at 10 to 15%, you got a problem. Okay, this is not a preference, this is a problem. Here we're not talking about something that's like, oh, some people prefer this and some people prefer that. No, this is actively keeping you from making progress and from living a good life. Because at that point, you have to obsess so much over your abs and your calories and all of that shit, and you just have a negative body image. Like, you need to actually fix this stupid mindset because it's not leading you anywhere in life. And so I will say that if you don't feel right between 10 and 15% body fat, you just feel too fat, you've got a problem. This is ruining your quality of life, and it's clearly only there because you have a skewed standard towards leanness from using too much social media and following the wrong people. And this is a standard that was created by men for men. Like, nobody actually gives a shit about this. This is the same thing as, you know, that girls had that fucking trend where you had to like have a gap between your two thighs, because if you didn't have that, you were disgusting or something. Like, that was the standard, that if your thighs like reached together and there was no gap between them, that was bad. Ask any man out there, any man, anybody, and they're going to say that the thigh gap just looks fucking weird. Like, who the fuck actually prefers that? Nobody, because that was a standard created by women for women. And this is the same. Nobody cares about you being under 10% body fat. You just look emaciated and you look like a starving person at that point. Now, to give you an analogy so that you understand why this is a problem, who doesn't like big tits? But if you meet the perfect soulmate for you who is exactly what you wanted in every single way except that she has only average tits, not small, not big, just average, just normal size. And just because of that, you cannot get hard and it doesn't work. That's not a preference, that's clearly a problem. That's a problem that you need to solve. Because you're gripping so hard onto this one standard that you have of big tits that it's completely ruining your relationship with somebody who you really, really like. So again, that's a problem, and this is exactly the same. This is not a preference that you want to be under 10% body fat. It's making your quality of life worse, and it's keeping you from making gains. From making gains, which is something that you care about, obviously. And this mindset of constantly trying to stay below 10% body fat all the time and never gaining weight becomes an endless cycle, because gaining weight and therefore body fat is exactly what would be the solution to your problems. As Mike says himself,
you know, they want to be on the beach and flexing their abs. Their abs are cool and all, but they're not the super shredded abs. And so even their lifestyle kind of isn't what they want.
You want to be on the beach with shredded abs, but your abs are not shredded. That's a you problem. You got shit abs. Your abs are just simply not big enough, because if they would be big enough, they would be showing even at 15% body fat easily. But the problem is, in order to get them bigger, you will have to gain weight and body fat. That's just how it goes. And if you're never willing to do that, you will be constantly stuck at the same fucking physique that's below 10% for the rest of your life. But if you actually start training your abs correctly and you bulk slowly, for long periods of time, your abs will never disappear again. And they will become eye-poking even at higher body fat levels. And here I've got an action step for you. Go on Instagram and unfollow everybody who's on steroids. Then go on TikTok, do the same. Go on YouTube, do the same. Go on every single platform when you follow juicers and do the same. And just by that, over time, your standards will become much more normal. And I don't give a shit if they might give good information. There are naturals also who give good information. And what do you want? Twice as much good information or a healthy body image? You can still have the good information, just not as much of it. And also, when it comes to big steroid users, it's always going to be a mixed bag. They're either good or they're not. But when it comes to big naturals, usually their advice is solid, because if they wouldn't understand training, how the fuck would they get big naturally?
The problem is that if you start in the pretty lean range, especially in the higher end, 13, 14% body fat, for some people, pretty soon, 4 or 6 weeks into a bulk that's supposed to last 16, let's say, because they started at pretty lean and not ultra lean, they're going to get a little fluffy halfway through or even a third of the way through. And they're going to not like that. And they're going to be like, man, fuck this. I need a mini cut. I need XYZ. And all of a sudden, the bulk falls apart.
So you should never get fluffy 4-6 weeks into bulk. At that point, you shouldn't even really be able to see any visual changes at all. And a bulk should not last 16 weeks like Mike says. It should last much longer than that. You can barely build anything in 16 weeks. When it comes to bulking as a natural, it takes momentum, okay? It takes you to do it for a long time. Even if your bulk, let's say, you will bulk for a year, but you do it in like 3 years. So let's say you always bulk a little bit, then I don't know, fucking maintain, then bulk a little bit, all of that shit. Instead of just bulking for 1 year straight, the second option is going to be better because bulking takes momentum as a natural. And 13% is actually the body fat percent, which I would recommend you start your bulk at. For most people at least, I personally started my bulk at, I would say, around 12 or maybe 13% body fat, and it turned out really well. And I believe that it will turn out the same way for most people because I'm just an average person. And 13% is really that body fat where if you start bulking, you should be able to bulk for at least an entire year, no matter what your body fat preferences are. So if your preference is you do not want to get any higher at body fat than 16%, first of all, that's going to hold you back a little bit. But even if that's your preference, that's not a crazily unrealistic preference. Even then, 13% to 16% in 1 year, that's perfect. You will start at 13%, bulk for 1 year. You will end most likely at 15-16%. That's perfect. And then you can do a small cut and then you start the whole thing again. So if you bulk at the correct pace and you start it from 13% and you cannot stand bulking like that for 1 year, your standards of leanness are bad and they're skewed too much towards leanness and you're not going to get big with those standards. So you either change that or you accept remaining small for the rest of your life. I'm sorry. That's how the game works. If you actually want to gain muscle, you have to be willing to put on a little bit of body fat. But again, that doesn't have to be a problem necessarily, because if you actually build big muscles, you're going to still look lean even at higher body fat percentages, and you're going to look good, and especially your abs do not have to disappear because they can be visible even at fucking 18-20% body fat if you train them correctly. He says that if you cannot make it through because you've become too fat in your own eyes, that's a problem. And I agree, that's a problem. But in a lot of cases, what you really need to do is just optimize your standards of leanness and not actually to just go according to your preferences. Because a lot of people, again, do not have preferences. What they have is a problem. A preference is you want to be in the, like, I don't know, between 12 and 17% and you don't want to go to 20%, that's a preference. A preference of, hey, I want to be between, I don't fucking know, 9 and 13%, and if I get anything above 13%, I already think that I'm too fat. That's not a preference. That's a body image problem. Your body will not randomly change and become optimal at super lean body fat, so you just need to change your standards. You just need to fix your body image issues. And also keep in mind that the only one who really cares is you. Like most people, if you have 15-inch arms and you're 15% body fat, you're already hot as fuck. You're already lean. You're already big. Like that's the standard of the average person. And then he goes into the upsides, and there are a lot of upsides, and I agree with them. And this is exactly why you should start bulking in this range. Something that I will say though is that why you can still have good bulking progress at the lower end of the spectrum, getting there might be the problem, okay? So for me personally, like if I cut down to 10% body fat and I start bulking there, sure, my progress from like 10 to 12, 13% body fat is going to be fine when I'm bulking. The only problem is that getting there at the end of my cut is just wasting time, because at around 13, 12% body fat, my lift starts to go down, my energy starts going down, my entire life quality just starts going down, and from that point onwards, it's just not worth it for me to continue cutting, okay? So the bulking is still gonna be fine, but there's a cost of going there, and if you would just not go there, you wouldn't really lose out on anything. Like those extra 2 fucking % of ROM weight do not really matter in contrast of what you're losing when you're trying to get there. So again, this will be different for everybody. So for some people, like I know that some people can easily go to like 10% body fat and they will not see any performance drop off or anything, and they will only start noticing that when they're like going below double digits, so when they get into single digits, and that's perfectly fine. Like if you're one of those people, again, cut as long as you can without like negative side effects. And I'm not talking about like being hungry. Like obviously if you're cutting, you're just gonna be hungry. I'm talking about like when all of your lifts start going down and all of that shit, yeah, that's when you need to stop your cut. From then on, it's not going to be productive anymore. You're not making room for bulking, which you should be doing when you cut. At that point, you're just trying to get too shredded, more shredded than your body wants you to be. But one important thing for me to say here is that if only your leverage dependent lifts go down, so stuff like bench and squats that really depend on your body weight, then that is not a problem. Because when it comes to the bench press, the higher your body weight is, like even if you didn't build any muscle, your bench is going to get better. That's also a problem with getting really fat, is you can get stronger without actually building muscle, but we will get back to that a little bit later. The point is, if your bench and your squats, which are very leverage based, start going down a little bit, but your push downs and your bicep curls and lateral raises and all that shit is just keeping up, you have no problems. When stuff that isn't leverage based also starts going down, that's when you have a problem.
Kind of fluffy for males for us is 15 to 25% body fat. A big range, right?
This is where he starts getting into kind of fluffy, which is 15 to 25% body fat according to him. And again, this is where it doesn't make any sense because the range is just way too big.
A big range, right?
It goes all the way from very lean, like 15% is somebody who's very lean, to somebody who is knocking at the door of obesity.
Some downsides of being kind of fluffy. One is you're not in what I would call prime sex shape.
So the first problem with 15 to 25 is that you're not in prime sex shape. This is already a straw man because it is not really true for half of the range because the range is just too big. 15% body fat is exactly prime sex shape. You're not too lean, so you look big. You're not too fat, so you don't look fat. You will look the best in real life at this body fat percentage, and if that is not the case for you, you still need to build more muscle. Which, by the way, at this body fat, you can only do by bulking. I would argue that you start getting a little like fluffier looking at like 18-19%-ish, but this will also depend a lot on the person and how your body distributes body fat. So we've already established that 15% is exactly prime sex shape. Then let's say I'm like 16-17%, so I'm not prime sex shape anymore, right? Well, personally, I do not seem to really feel that. Like I don't really have a lot of problems getting dates. I'm perfectly fine, thank you. So no, I will have to disagree. 16-17% is still prime sex shape. Let's look at 20%. My first question, are you above 30? If the answer is yes, you're automatically, if you're only 20% body fat, you're automatically prime sex shape. Doesn't matter how much muscle you have, you're above 30, people are just happy that you're not like fat. But what if you're below 30? Do you have at least a decent amount of muscle? If the answer is no, you're probably going to start looking a little bit weird at like 20%. I agree, that might not really be prime sex shape at that point if you don't have enough muscle, because you will just kind of look skinny fat. If you do, however, have enough muscle, 20% body fat is still going to be prime sex shape. If you have enough muscle at that body fat, you can just pull off the fucking bear look, and a lot of people like that. More girls like that kind of look than you would imagine, especially like when people say like, oh, the dad bod. What a dad bod means for you might be completely different, but that's kind of what the dad bod means. It's somebody who's fucking muscular, but it's not like actually lean. It's just like 20% body fat, which is still healthy, but it's the upper end of healthy. At last, let's say we have 25%, the end of the range. Is that prime sex shape? No, not at all. I 100% agree. Above 20% body fat, like from like 21, you're just going to look fat. Yeah, that is not prime sex shape, but everything below that is going to be that. So this is a fucking Strowman because it's not true for like half of the range.
Some people just don't want to get out of their, like, saying their fuckboy shape, and there's not a goddamn thing wrong with that.
I agree, but 15% is really fucking lean in any normal person's eye.
Another one. You're now getting into the body fat level that for some people might start to lower your workout endurance.
So your workout endurance doesn't actually start going down if you keep doing your cardio and you don't go above 20% body fat.
Especially on compound anti-gravity movements. So like barbell rows, your lower back, that's all you feel. And you would have done more reps for your upper back, but your lower back kicked out because it's like, dude, I can't do this. It spends all day walking your fat ass around and keeping you upright. It's too goddamn tired.
Only feeling your lower back on barbell rows really doesn't make any sense at all. I think that has to be just simply a mic problem because number one, if you look at him, he's constantly going around with a hyperextended back all day. So of course your back fucking gets tired. Number two, he's an enhanced lifter and some compounds are notoriously known for causing back pumps. But I honestly highly doubt that this would happen to anybody in this range who is a natural unless you have a really fucking weak lower back.
Another one. It's tough to see changes. Like some people are really motivated by visual changes. Like my fucking delts look beefier. My fucking arms are filled out. But when you're at 21% body fat, it's like, I don't know, you kind of look like a person in 1 week and a person in week 3 and a person in week 5.
This is not even an argument. It's always difficult to see changes. That's how lifting works. Lifting and bulking is just simply a slow game and it takes a lot of time to see any changes. And you could grow your arms 1 inch in a year and while you're doing it, you're not really noticing anything. And that's exactly why you need to take measurements. You should see the changes in your measurements first and then you're going to see it in your physique. If you only rely on the mirror, you will have no idea whether your training is working or not. That's why you need to take measurements. When you do take measurements, you're going to see the numbers go up, hopefully, and you will know that you are getting bigger even if you do not see any visual changes in the mirror yet, and then slowly over time you will actually start noticing the changes. He then starts talking about competing bodybuilders, which doesn't interest us, so I'm just not going to talk about that at all.
When you're fat enough, 23% or some shit like that, getting fatter. So the downside is that I said earlier that you can't track visual changes because it all looks kind of the same. The bad side, point 1 to that, is that you can't get motivated by visual changes. The bad side, point 2 to that, is that getting fatter doesn't seem to make you fatter. You just kind of look the same. It doesn't make you lose any visible leanness.
I agree on this one. You definitely start losing track of body fat gain after like maybe 18% body fat. However, that's why you should take measurements. That's why you should track your measurements, and that's why one of the measurements that you take should be your waist. Now, I agree with the upsides that he lists mostly. However, the body image one is a little bit mixed.
When you're so not lean that you stop obsessing about your leanness, you can stop obsessing with body image, refocus your energy on improving your rep strength in the gym, put months of that rep strength in the gym back to back to back and actually gain some goddamn muscle.
He says that at this point you get so not lean that you stop obsessing over body image and you start focusing on adding rep strength instead, which he says is a good thing. Now, the first part, which is not obsessing over body image, is a good thing, but you should be able to do that between 10 and 20%. You just have to learn how to do it. You just have to adopt the mindset. You have to fix your body image. Maybe not look at social media as much. Again, unfollow the enhanced lifters, unfollow the super lean lifters. But the working on adding rep strength instead is a little bit mixed, because while that is what's going to work when you're at a reasonable body fat percentage and you're bulking at a reasonable rate, the problem is when you get a little bit like too fat. On a lot of lifts, you're able to progress just by adding body weight, even though you're not adding any muscle. Especially one of those lifts is the bench press. You can add like fucking 10 pounds to your body weight and add a couple of pounds to your bench press, but you haven't actually built any muscle. So you can literally, like, if you just gain 50 pounds of body fat, no muscle at all, your bench is going to go up by a lot. But as soon as you lose all of the body fat, your bench is going to go back to its original weight, because what you gained was not muscle, what you gained was leverage. It was leverage from, having more fat here, so your the bar doesn't have to go down as much, and you have more stability on the bench and all that shit. So if you get fat to chase numbers, I have bad news for you. These are the bad news. Your strength is not coming from building muscle, it's just coming from the fat you're building, and you're going to lose it as soon as you lose the fat.
When you're lean, you fucking wake up, you go to the mirror, you fucking check your abs. Later, you're at the gas station with friends, you fucking close the cooler, you're like, fuck, check your abs. You get into the car with friends, you go to the beach with the girlfriends, you fucking car reflection, check your abs. Later at the beach, Stacy's like, oh my God, you look so good. You're like, yeah. Fucking, what do you think about that? She's like, yeah, I just thought you look good. That meant I meant your abs. Like, all right. You want to see him again? She's like, all right, whatever. You do that shit all the time. You're body obsessed. And if your abs start to kind of float away from you, you're like, whoa, it's time to shut it down.
So the problem here is that your abs should never start to float away from you. There is so much focus on abs in this video. And the problem is, like, when you're a serious natural lifter, you should always have a six-pack year-round. They should never disappear. If you train your abs correctly and you don't bulk quickly, you should never lose your abs. If you have lost your abs, you either have too weak abs or you've gotten too fat. Now, are they gonna be a little more blurry at 20% than at 13%? Yeah, sure, but still, you should be able to see them all throughout. Then he starts talking about the full range. I'm not going to talk about that range because it's simply stupid. You should never get into that range, obviously. That is called obesity. So there's really no reason to talk about that at all, so we're just going to go on.
How do you choose your range? I got a couple things to say about this. First is try these ranges.
Okay, so we got to choosing your range. Mike here recommends that you try these ranges. I, on the other hand, recommend that you never go above 20% body fat as a male. By the way, all of these percentages I'm always saying for men because I have no fucking idea about the body fat percentages of women and like how many women are watching this video. If any of you are out here, I'm sorry. But yeah, 20% plus. No, never do that, all right? That's just simply unhealthy. Science says it's unhealthy, and also it looks unhealthy. You just look fat at that point. And also, I personally would never go below 10%. I would advise you to never go below that because it's just going to take away from your lifting. And after a certain point, it can also become unhealthy too.
You're looking for your best rep strength gains. If you're making excellent rep strength gains in a certain range, that's probably the right range for you. And also your best psychological feeling. You're not getting a ton of low hunger or restriction feels. You have relatively low cortisol and stress. It's a highly sustainable environment for you to continue to bulk. Basically ask yourself the question of like, all right, I just bulked from 9% to 14% fat. Did I like it? Could I do this again?
Here I will add that your feeling will also depend on the pace of your bulk. So if you're bulking too quickly, and let's say you started at like 10% and you got relatively quickly to 15%, yeah, you're going to feel like shit at 15%, like I always did back then. But now I'm at 16-17%, I feel really good because it took me like the last 1 year and 2.5 months to get here from like 13%. So it was over a long time period. And my body actually got used to it. It wasn't just like, it was like this. And also, I'm doing my cardio. That's very important. If you start bulking and you don't do your cardio, and especially if you, on top of that, also bulk too quickly, yeah, do not get surprised if you're going to feel like shit, if you get out of breath, all that stuff. So keep in mind that if you bulk to a body fat percentage that you didn't feel good at, maybe you have bulked too quickly into that body fat percentage, and maybe if you start bulking into it again, but now you do it much slower, the next time when you get to it, you're going to feel great at that body fat percentage. Just try it. He says that a lot of this really comes down to just personal preference because there's no clear research that indicates that one of these ranges should be like better than all of the other ones for muscle growth, so it doesn't really matter. But that's where anecdotal evidence comes in. I find it so weird that all of these science-based guys, when the science doesn't say anything about a certain topic, they just say, okay, it doesn't matter. I don't fucking know. They just say, okay, then I have clearly no data on this by science, so we're just gonna do whatever the fuck we want to know. We have data on this, not by science, but we have anecdotal evidence of people discovering for fucking decades at this point that, yeah, going to really like super lean doesn't really work, and going to really high doesn't really work either because it's unhealthy. So maybe you should just stay between like 10 and 20%. Maybe even 10 for a lot of people is going to be too low, and they should only go to like 12, 13%, 14 maybe. Also, Mike says that it doesn't really matter. Science says there's no difference in going above 20% body fat. However, science says that there is one difference in going above 20% body fat, which is not in gains, it's just that you become unhealthy. That's the clear cutoff for healthy versus unhealthy. So don't go above that.
Let me tell you something real straight up. You got to be at least okay with how you look at the end of a gain phase. Because if you're not okay with it, you just won't get there. You're not going to go there.
Yeah, I agree. You should be able to tolerate yourself throughout all of your bulk and even at the end of your bulk, and you shouldn't feel disgusted with yourself even at the end of your bulk. But a lot of people have very shit standards and they cannot tolerate even a little bit of fat on their body. And to that people, I have one thing to say. Your preferences are unproductive. You need to fix yourself to make gains. And you need to accept a bit of body fat and stop being so obsessed about being shredded.
If you're at a certain level of body fat and you're like, dude, I can't bulk because I don't want to get much fat on this, there is absolutely hope. Consider creating yourself a bulking runway. By doing what? By taking 8 to 10 weeks and losing a pound a week on a fat loss diet. So first of all, 8 to 10 weeks is not that long. A pound a week lost on a diet is just not that much. It's just not that much.
Here he finally gets into numbers. So he says that if you want to start a bulk, but you feel like you're too fat to start a bulk, you can make yourself a bulking runway with a fatless phase of 8 to 10 weeks. That's generally a good idea, and I agree with that. But if you're at like 18% or above, you can also just recomp. The way he suggests that you do the 8 to 10 weeks of a fatless phase is however terrible, and here is where we will get into the numbers. Mike suggests losing 1 pound of body weight per week. That is simply way too little, especially when you're in the higher body fat percent ranges. I'm sick and fucking tired of hearing this 1 pound a week all the time. I've heard this for so fucking long, and I have sacrificed so much progress to this because I spent like fucking half a year cutting all the time, because you have to cut it only 1 pound per week because otherwise you will lose muscle. Bull motherfucking shit. You know what happened the last time when I cut? I lost like 2.5 pounds per week, and you know what happened? Nothing. I didn't lose fucking muscle. Nothing happened. You know what the only thing that happened was? I completed my cut in like less than 3 months instead of fucking up my entire year to do that shit. I have no idea why this fucking lose 1 pound of body weight per week advice is coming from every single motherfucking source. All of them are wrong, and I know that this is not only Mike who's saying that. There's a lot of other people who have said this before. This is fucking bullshit. This will depend completely on the person, on the body fat percentage you're at, on your body weight, which will depend a lot on your height. It will depend on your gender. 1 pound a week. First of all, this shouldn't be a universal number. Second of all, 1 pound per week is too little for almost fucking anybody. 1 pound a week of weight loss might be appropriate if you're a woman, unless you're a tall woman, or if you're not very tall, or towards the very end of a cut where you're getting into like really low body fat numbers, which is, by the way, something that I said like 10 times throughout the video that I do not recommend. For a normal man, however, or a bit taller woman, 1 pound a week becomes unnecessarily little. You can cut faster than that and nothing will happen, especially if you're at a higher body fat percentage. If you're a tall guy at like 20% body fat, you can even easily go for like 3 pounds, maybe even 4 pounds per week if you're really like high body fat percentage and really tall. You should experiment for yourself with how fast you can go, and you should go the fastest that you can without your numbers decreasing all across the board, okay? So not just the leverage dependent lifts, but most of the lifts. So if it's only the bench press and squat and stuff like that, again, it probably doesn't matter. You're probably not actually losing any muscle. You're just losing your leverage. And when that stops working, which will usually be between 14 and 10% body fat for most people, when I'm talking about men, obviously, that's when you stop your cut. Because from then on, it's just not worth cutting more. All this slow cutting does is it takes precious time away for you that you could spend productively bulking. And what do you get in return? Nothing.
In your next bulk, plan to gain half a pound a week and stick to it with alterations, an RP Diet Coach app can help you with that, well, whatever. Then over the course of 18 weeks, you come back to the same body weight you were.
Then the big reveal that I was waiting for, the pace of the bulk. He says 0.5 pounds, so basically half a pound a week, which actually really surprised me. I thought that he was gonna say a much higher number because he said that you get fat from starting at 13-14% in like 5 to 6 weeks or whatever the fuck he said, and that a bulk should last 16 weeks. But with all of that said, half a pound a week is still gonna be too fast for a lot of people. It's what I've been doing last year, and even me, I'm not doing that anymore. I went back to 0.25 pounds a week, which is, by the way, 1 pound a month. But yeah, even me, when I started my bulk that I'm doing currently, throughout the first entire year, I was going at the pace that Mike suggested here. And even at the end of it, I started noticing that it is becoming too fast at that point, and so I cut it in half, and now I'm perfectly fine. And this is coming from somebody who is really tall and fucking heavy, okay? Like, by the time that this has become too fast for me, I was like 200 pounds heavy, and I am 6'3". And by the way, from now on, I'm going to say these numbers on a monthly basis, not on a weekly basis, because it just doesn't make sense. Mike says that, oh, it's per week. No, not per week. Don't look at a week, especially when we're talking about numbers that are this low. Like, half a pound a week is already kind of stuff that you cannot really measure. There's going to be too much room for error in just 1 week. So you gotta look at it on a monthly basis. Like, even when you measure yourself every single day, your weekly measurements can still, like, you can still gain at a good rate, but if you only look at like your weekly averages, it will say that, oh, you're fucking it up, but you're actually not. So you have to look at the monthly. That's number one. So now I'm going to refer to it as 1 pound per month of gain or 2 pounds per month of gain. So this is why Mike's bulks are so short, because he's bulking too quickly. I was right. So let's look at what a good pace would be for bulking. If you're just starting lifting with zero experience and you're skinny, so you're below 15% body fat, 2 pounds per month honestly can be realistic. If you're really tall, I would say that you might even be able to go for 3 pounds per month for the first couple of months. Keep in mind that these are numbers that you can hit, but you do not have to, okay? So let's say you could gain 3 pounds per month, but you're only gonna gain 2 instead. Nothing happened. Yeah, you're going to slow down your progress a little bit unnecessarily, but that's still gonna be better than saying like, oh, okay, actually I might just try 4 pounds and then gaining fat, because then you will have to cut off that fat, all right? So going a little bit slower than you feel would be safe is always gonna be better than going a little bit faster and aiming for more when it comes to bulking. If you're above 15% body fat and a beginner, 1 pound per month should already do the job, because you can also like use a little bit of fat that you already have, since you clearly have enough fat to build muscle and you're not too skinny. So you don't need as much extra fuel. And if you're close to 20% or you're at 20%, you can even just not gain anything and just recomp, obviously, until that stops working. And when that stops working, you can just start bulking. Now, if you're not a beginner anymore, you could probably look at 2 pounds per month, the amount that Mike says. If you're tall, like if you're really tall, maybe for a year or two, but definitely not more than that. And after that, you can reduce it either to like first 1.5 and then 1 pounds per month, or you can just go straight at 1 like I did. And eventually even the 1 pound a month will be too quick, and that's when you will start getting a little bit closer to the end of the intermediate status and you're starting to get advanced, and that's when progress really starts slowing down, and you can probably look at 0.5 pounds, so half a pound per month. However, if you're on the shorter side and you're not a beginner anymore, 2 pounds per month is already probably going to be too fast for you. So let's aim for either 1.5 or just straight 1 instead. And then again, after some time, that is also going to get too fast, and then you can cut that in half as well. Keep in mind that it's your job to take measurements every single month and decide when a given pace becomes too fast for you. You can do that based on the trend of the waist measurement compared to the trend of all of the other measurements. So an example, if your waist used to go up 0.1 inch every single month, and your arms as well, and that was the case throughout most of your bulk, but now you've already been doing it for like a year, and now in the past couple of months it started getting more skewed towards the waist measurements and your arms are not progressing as quickly, but your waist measurement is going up more than 0.1 inch per month, so it's already like 0.2, 3 every single month, then you see that that pace is starting to become too fast for you and you probably need to reduce it a little bit. And doing all of this should put you at a very favorable ratio of bulking to cutting. Mike then talks about an 18-week bulk to get back to the same body weight as you were at before creating the runway. All I can say is an 18-week bulk is nothing. That will barely make you gain any muscle, even if you do it at 2 pounds a month pace, but especially if you do it at 1 pound a month, which would be a lot more reasonable, but no, we're Dr. Mike, we have to bulk too quickly. But here you could actually only go back 1 pound a month, and then you would have 36 weeks to go up instead of 18, which is a lot more reasonable. It's still not 1 year yet, but that's already a time period where you can actually make some gains that you will actually be able to notice at that point. The problem with 1 pound down and half a pound up per week is that it has a bulking to cutting ratio of 2:1. Which is really shit. Especially when you realize that you cannot immediately start bulking after a cut, because what happens when you do a cut? Your metabolism slows down, so after that you will have to do a reverse diet to slowly build up your metabolism again, because if you just instantly go from cut to bulk, you will just randomly get fat. So you need a couple of weeks between the cut and the bulk to get back your old, faster metabolism, so you don't just get fat, but you actually start bulking properly. So the ratio is not even 2:1, it's even worse. So that means that you're going to spend more than a third of your time cutting, which is terrible. You want this ratio to be skewed towards bulking as much as possible within reason. Take this on the other hand. You cut 2 pounds a week for 10 weeks, then you bulk back at 1 pound a month for 20 months. Congratulations, that gives you a bulking to cutting ratio of 20 to 2.5. Isn't that much better? Of course it is. After this, he goes into this complete mindfuck of how to lose body fat without cutting for a long time. I will let him speak for this one because it's, come on.
You're in the 20-ish% body fat range, but you really want to hang out kind of the 12-ish% range. What you do is you do 10 weeks down, and then you only do, let's say, 5, 6, 8 weeks up. Because down is a pound per week and up is half a pound per week, you end up lighter at the end of every single bulking phase than you were at the last bulking phase. So your peak body fat percent is 20% at the end of one bulking phase, 18 at the next, 17 at the one after, 15 at the one after, and sooner or later, after a few years, same bulking and cutting, you've been gaining muscle this whole time, and you've been losing fat this entire time.
This doesn't make any sense. Just do a cut if you want to get lean and then bulk. I guarantee you that 10 weeks of cutting followed by 5, 6, 8 weeks of bulking is not going to get you anywhere. It's never going to get you jacked. And this is a terrible idea. First of all, this doesn't factor in the reverse diet that I was talking about before. Second of all, an 8-week bulk does nothing, let alone a 5, 6 week bulk. You need to gain momentum in bulking. It's a slow process. Do you think giving your body a surplus for 8 weeks and then taking it away and randomly depriving it again for 10 weeks is going to lead you anywhere? All of this just to not do a proper cut. Sometimes I completely forget that this guy has a PhD because he says so extremely dumb shit that I cannot fathom how anybody who doesn't see anything wrong with this could get any further education after graduating from high school. I will ask you one question. Which sounds better to you? Doing this yo-yoing shit for several years to go down a few percent in body fat while making little to no gains, or just cutting for like 2-3 months and then bulking?
Dieting mixed with bulking, a little bit more dieting, a little less bulking, even 1-to-1. Fuck, 1-to-1 is great. Watch this. So you lose 10 pounds over 10 weeks. Then over 10 weeks, you gain 5 pounds because it's only half the gain of the loss. You get to bulk for exactly as long as cutting, but you are 5 pounds bereft of body fat that you had before. 5 pounds at a reasonable body weight, that is 2% body fat. That's a big deal. So every time you go through one of these phases, with some maintenance phases, active rest thrown in there, every year you come down a few body fat percentage points.
He then says that even 1-to-1 is good and you should throw in some maintenance phases and active recovery phases in there, whatever the fuck that means. I actually know what it means. Mike doesn't really like to train, so he makes up fancy words for a period of slacking off, so it sounds like it's something smart that you actually need. And with all of this shit, congratulations, you now don't even have a 1-to-1 ratio of bulking to cutting. Might as well just stop bulking altogether and cut instead until you just disappear. Although even that would take a really long time with only losing 1 pound of body weight per week.